This is the Bible Book Club, and we're in the book of Deuteronomy.
Welcome to the club.
If you just found us for the first time, welcome to the Bible Book Club, Season 5, the book of Deuteronomy. If you've been with us since the beginning of Genesis, well, kudos to you. You are about to complete the Torah, which means you have read 1/5 of the entire Bible. That is quite an accomplishment.
It is.
Congratulations. And if you've been with us for a while, you might notice during this episode that Susan is recovering from bronchitis, so she'll sound a little different than normal. But for those of you who are new, we call this podcast the Bible Book Club because the Bible is the #1 selling book of all time. It must be read. It is fascinating to discuss. The problem is that most of us really don't have a ton of time to do that. But what if all you had to do was listen while you drive, work out, fold the laundry? We make that possible for you. We read and discuss, and you just have to download and listen. Book by book, chapter by chapter, we are not skipping one word of this book. The only other thing you need to know is that as we discuss, we will occasionally point out what we call a Bible bender. So I'm going to explain to you guys what that is. The Bible is one of those books that teaches you something new every single time you read it. Sometimes we trip over information. That is a mind bender, but here in the Bible Book Club, we call it a Bible bender. It's information with a revelation, something that makes you realize that this book is about God's plan for us, and it was divinely directed. A Bible bender for me may be different than a Bible bender for you, but it is our hope that by listening, you will learn something new that you never knew before. And the more you learn, the more you will grow in your faith.
Exactly. So why do you need to read the book of Deuteronomy? The answer to this question was a Bible bender for me, actually. I did not know that this book is considered in the top 3 most important books to the Jews. In fact, when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, there were more scrolls of Psalms, Deuteronomy, and Isaiah than any other book. And Deuteronomy is quoted in 60 of the 66 books of the Bible. I also did not know that Jesus quoted the book of Deuteronomy more than any other book in the Old Testament except Psalms. In fact, some theologians believe it was Jesus's favorite book. Now, Deuteronomy was the first book that Jesus directly quoted after his baptism when he was tempted by the devil in the wilderness. All 3 of Jesus' answers to the devil came from Deuteronomy, and you can see Luke chapter 4 to read that. Jesus quoted Deuteronomy in response to one of the most important questions ever asked of him. In Matthew 22, the Pharisees asked, "Which is the greatest commandment?" Jesus quoted Deuteronomy 6:5. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. And to give a plug for that fascinating book that is rarely read, Jesus quotes Leviticus for the second greatest commandment, and you can listen to Leviticus on the Bible Book Club Season 3. And that's really mostly why I think you should read the book of Deuteronomy, because it was important to Jesus, it should be important to us. Now, the last Bible bender for me is this. I did not realize that Paul was a Deuteronomy fan and quotes or alludes to the book often, especially in Romans and Corinthians. For this reason, many people compare Moses to Paul. Both were intent on laying out God's purpose and plan for God's people. And many call Deuteronomy the gospel according to Moses because it provides the foundation for the Old Testament, the way the book of Romans is often called the gospel according to Paul, which provides the theological foundation for the New Testament. So both these books are so important, Romans and Deuteronomy. Keep that in mind. Deuteronomy was the gospel or good news of what God had done to redeem the Israelites from Egypt, just as Romans is the gospel or good news to us of what Jesus has done to redeem us from sin. Now, here's what you need to know about Deuteronomy. The author of all 5 of the books of the Torah in the Bible is Moses. Those are the first 5 books. These 5 books, as a collection, have several names: the Torah, the Pentateuch, the Law. In the first book, Genesis, Moses tells the story from creation through Noah. Also the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then the 12 sons who become the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, when Genesis ends and we've got these 12 tribes, there is silence for 400 years as these 12 tribes grow into a family of almost 2 million people while living in slavery in Egypt. What is totally unique about the last 4 books of the Torah is that they include the story about one man. So after Genesis starts Moses' story and his journey to lead these people, the Israelites. There are 137 chapters in these 4 books that are all Moses. It is 1/5 of the entire Bible. Now, why so much? 1/5 of the entire Bible for all 5 books. But why so much? God does not waste words. If Moses and the Israelite story were not important, it would not be in the Bible in such detail. And Deuteronomy is the epic conclusion to that story. It is the continuation of the story from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. Now, the name of the book. Why is it called Deuteronomy? In Hebrew, the book is called Devarim, which means words. The Hebrew name is taken from the first phrase in the book in Hebrew, which is, "These are the words." However, when the book was translated, the Greeks renamed it Deuteronomium, or Second Law. This can be misleading about the book because the book is not a second set of laws. It is a reiteration of the law already given with a few distinctions. The book, in summary, is a reiteration, but it also is a challenge for this new generation of Israelites to love God. Now, here's a fun fact about those first 4 words of Deuteronomy, which are, "These are the words," in relation to the other 4 books of the Torah. The book of Genesis begins with the words, "In the beginning, God." The next 3 books, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, in Hebrew, all begin with the word "and." This means that the first 4 books are one continuous story. Deuteronomy, however, stands alone. It begins with, "These are the words Moses spoke to the Israelites." So the Torah as a whole goes something like this. In the beginning, God did this in Genesis, and God did this in Exodus, and God did this in Leviticus, and God did this in Numbers. And after God did all that, Moses, the great shepherd of millions of people, the pastor of all pastors, had something to say about it. So these are the words Moses spoke to Israel in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is what Moses wants the world to never, ever forget. Deuteronomy is Moses's passionate preaching to the Israelites to apply to their lives what God laid out in the first 4 books. And that's why he's compared to Paul. Now, what does God want us to never, ever forget? We will find that both Jesus and Paul have a lot to say about that in the New Testament. The timeline of Moses' story, let's talk about that. To get the timeline and story straight, we have a chart in the show notes that aligns the 4 books with the Israelites' travels and the time period in which they traveled. The chart shows that the 40 years of travel start in Exodus 19 around 1446 BC and end in Deuteronomy around 1406 BC. 38 of the 40 years of wandering occur in the book of Numbers, season 4 of Bible Book Club. So you can check that out. We do have a theme verse for Deuteronomy. It's this, Deuteronomy 30, 19 through 20.
"This day I call the heavens and the earth as witness against you that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him. For the Lord is your life. He will give you many years in the land he swore to give to your fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob."
I love it because if we just love the Lord, he is our life. Okay, here are 4 fundamentals Moses wants to convey to you in this book. First, the Israelites have just one God, period. And that's a fundamental for him because they were living in a culture where the other countries had tons of gods. Second, the covenant is their bond with God. Keep the covenant. Third, Israel's task is to love and obey God. Pretty simple, because if they do that, then the covenant will work out. Fourth, the land is Israel's only for as long as they are faithful to God. All right, moving on to our story. And here is the setup for that. So if you can get your head in the space, here's where we are in the Bible, and here's where we're going to go. After Genesis, the Torah tells the story of Moses' mission to get the Israelites to the Promised Land. Along the way, God molds Israel into a nation. And there's so much about that. That's pretty cool. They are his treasured possession, and they are to be a priesthood. Now, Moses' mission began in Exodus, where God delivered the Israelites from slavery in Egypt and made a covenant with them at Mount Sinai. The mission continued in Leviticus, where God provided a way for the people to live in his holy presence and provided the laws for purity and the tabernacle. The mission got off course in Numbers, where God led the Israelites for 38 years through the wilderness because of their rebellion. Deuteronomy is Moses' personal challenge to the Israelites to love and obey God. It is his farewell speech, the final words of a father to his beloved children. Moses' entire generation is gone. They died wandering in the desert, and he is the only one left. He wants his generation's children, that this second generation, to fare better than their parents. He wants them to live forever in the land promised by God. But to do that, Moses knows they must love God and obey him. They must not repeat the mistakes of their parents. And so, in Moses' final words in Deuteronomy, he's going to challenge them. To sum it up, Deuteronomy is the story of Moses' final words to encourage the next generation to be faithful to God. Now, as we open in Deuteronomy, Moses and the Israelites are camped at the threshold to the Promised Land on the plains of Moab. For Moses, this is the end. He's about to die, actually, in 30 days. He has been through so much with these people, good and bad. He wants their success, but fears their failure. It is almost 40 years after the law was given at Mount Sinai. As I said, the first generation died, and the second generation is young and full of hope. Moses is not. He is old, and he has been here before. He knows his fickle people are prone to sin. They just wasted 38 years wandering around because of it. Moses is anxious for his people. He knows how critical it is for them to have a right relationship with God. And so Moses is going to try to motivate them just one more time to complete the mission to get to that Promised Land. To do so, Moses puts on a different voice than before in the other 4 books. He puts on his pastor persona. And in this book, he is going to preach. Okay, so starting in chapter 1, remember, Moses is preaching to a new generation, so he's kind of review here. He's going to kind of go through things. So it should kick you back to Exodus as you hear all this. He starts with what they started with, the command to leave Horeb, which is really Mount Sinai, just another name for Mount Sinai.
These are the words Moses spoke to all Israel in the wilderness east of the Jordan, that is, in the Arabah, opposite Suf, between Paran, Tophel, Laban, Hazeroth, and Dizahab. It takes 11 days to go from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea by Mount Seir Road.
That first verse is just a lot of names identifying a location east of the Jordan. The second verse, about 11 days, is a bitter reminder. And it could tell us something about Moses' mood as he begins this sermon. From the past podcast seasons, you will remember that from Horeb, or Mount Sinai, to Kadesh Barnea was only an 11-day journey. They should have been in the Promised Land 38 years ago. Kadesh Barnea was where the Israelites were initially going to enter the promised land from the south. But they rebelled against God, and that 11-day journey from Mount Sinai to the promised land became a 38-year journey. If Moses sounds a little bitter, you really can't blame him. Most of this second generation actually should have been born in the promised land rather than in the wilderness. And Moses himself should have had that chance to live out his final years in the promised land. Now, in the show notes, if you're interested in the route that they took the first time versus now where they are, the route of the Exodus, which includes the route from Horeb or Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea. And if you're interested, we have a map from Kadesh Barnea to the plains of Moab, which is where they are now.
Verse 3, in the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses proclaimed to the Israelites all that the Lord had commanded him concerning them. This was after he had defeated Sihon, king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon, and at Edrei had defeated Og, king of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth.
Okay. So if you're with us in Exodus, you know that Moses' life can be divided into 3 equal periods of 40 years. 40 years as prince of Egypt, 40 years as a shepherd in Midian, and 40 years as the leader of the Israelites. This is the 40th year of that leadership. The poor man is 120 years old, and it is the first day of the 11th month. Now, from Joshua chapter 4, we will find out that the Israelites crossed the Jordan without Moses 2 months later on the 10th day of the first month. And we know that the Israelites are going to mourn in Moab for Moses' death 30 days. That means at this point right now, Moses has little over 30 days of life left to preach it and get these words out.
And it seems like he knows that, right? He's kind of, like you said, wanting better for this generation. So he's like, please remember the mistakes of the past and don't repeat them.
Yeah, I can only imagine that he was super ramped up. Like, oh my gosh, I gotta get a hold of them. They've got to understand they can never forget. That's the whole point. This is what Moses wants them and us to never, ever forget. So Moses begins the first of 3 passionate Apostle Paul type sermons. The first sermon is to remember what God has done.
Verse 5, east of the Jordan, in the territory of Moab, Moses began to expound this law, saying, the Lord our God said to us at Horeb, you have stayed long enough at this mountain. Break camp and advance into the hill country of the Amorites. Go to all the neighboring peoples in Arba, in the mountains, in the western foothills, in the Negev, along the coast, to the land of the Canaanites, and to Lebanon, as far as the great river, the Euphrates. See, I have given you this land. Go in and take possession of the land the Lord swore he would give to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to their descendants after them.
The promised land has been and will be a focus of the entire Old Testament. It is mentioned in every chapter of Deuteronomy except 2. Here's why. It was a promise made by God to the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, beginning in Genesis 12. It is a gift, a sign of their relationship and divine favor with God. Therefore, it is a place of provision and rest, and it is a taste for them of what they lost in the Garden of Eden. God's plan has always been for us to dwell in harmony with him. That's why he created man in the garden, where God and man dwelt in perfect relationship and peace. The promised land is to give part of that back versus, fighting tribes in the desert. But they must take the land, which is unlike the Garden of Eden, because that was given. Because of the fall in chapter 4 of Genesis, the land is something they must work for and work on. And the peace and prosperity they lost in the garden will come at a price. The first thing Moses wants them to remember is God had multiplied them as he promised. And, really, they're not an easy people to please. They need to remember this. That's why Moses is reiterating the story. Now, this next part is the story of how Israel developed a leadership infrastructure from Exodus chapter 18, season 2, episode 13.
Verse 9, at that time I said to you, you are too heavy a burden for me to carry alone. The Lord your God has increased your number so that today you are as numerous as the stars in the sky. May the Lord your God of your ancestors increase you 1,000 times and bless you as he promised. But how can I bear your problems and your burdens and your disputes all by myself? Choose some wise, understanding, and respected men from each of your tribes, and I will set them over you. You answered me, what you propose to do is good. So I took the leading men of your tribes, wise and respected men, and appointed them to have authority over you as commanders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, of tens, and as tribal officials. And I charged your judges at that time, hear the disputes between your people and judge fairly, whether the case is between two Israelites or between an Israelite and a foreigner residing among you. Do not show partiality in judging. Hear both small and great alike. Do not be afraid of anyone, for judgment belongs to God. Bring me any case too hard for you, and I will hear it. And at that time, I told you everything you were to do.
So Moses is, again, saying, okay, guys, this is the way it went down. This is what God said we want to do, and you need to just carry on with it. Now, it sounds as if Moses is grumbling a little bit, but I don't think this is the case. He's just stating the enormity of the task that happened at the time and how God set them up. He's pointing out the fact that God had delivered on a promise he made to Abraham in Genesis, that they would become great in number. And Moses had to appoint leaders to help organize the masses. It was simply impossible for him to communicate without social media and mediate without a court system between 2 million people. The idea for leaders and judges was actually Moses' father-in-law, Jethro's suggestion way back in the beginning. The criteria for a leader is new information for us that was not given in Exodus. And he added to that in Deuteronomy that the leaders were chosen by tribe because they were wise, understanding, and respected. And they were chosen to serve one of two roles, as military commanders or judges. Now, here's the second thing Moses wants them to remember. How Israel had a chance to live in the promised land 40 years ago and blew it. In other words, don't forget your mistakes. This is the story of the 12 spies and Israel's crucial rebellion at Kadesh Barnea from Numbers chapter 13, also in season 4, episode 7.
Verse 19, then, as the Lord our God commanded us, we set out from Horeb and went toward the hill country of the Amorites, through all that vast and dreadful wilderness that you have seen, and so we reached Kadesh Barnea. Then I said to you, you have reached the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving us. See, the Lord your God has given you the land. Go up and take possession of it as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, told you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged.
So the Israelites leave Mount Sinai after a year of commandments and after 11 days, and they arrive just south of the promised land at Kadesh Barnea. Moses says, we're here. Go, take the land. Yay. Then, probably in response to the looks on the men's panicked faces when he said that, he adds, don't be afraid.
Verse 22, then all of you came to me and said, let us send men ahead to spy out the land for us and bring back a report about the route we are about to take and the towns we will come to.
This was a stall tactic. The Israelites have been following a cloud at this point that leads them wherever they go. They have God as their navigator. They don't need anything else when they enter the promised land. But Moses agrees. Maybe he's sensing their panic. I don't know, but he agrees.
Verse 23, the idea seemed good to me. So I selected 12 of you, one man from each tribe. They left and went up into the hill country and came to the valley of Eshcol and explored it. Taking with them some of the fruit of the land, they brought it down to us and reported, it is a good land that the Lord our God is giving to us.
Their report about the land was good, but their report about the people, or giants, as they called them in Exodus, was really bad. And the people panicked more and rebelled.
Verse 26, but you were unwilling to go up. You rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. You grumbled in your tents and said, the Lord hates us, so he brought us out of Egypt to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites and destroy us. Where can we go? Our brothers have made our hearts melt in fear. They say the people are stronger and taller than we are. The cities are large with walls up to the sky. We even saw the Anakites there. Then I said to you, do not be terrified. Do not be afraid of them. The Lord your God, who is going before you, will fight for you, as he did for you in Egypt before your very eyes and in the wilderness. There you saw how the Lord your God carried you as a father carries his son all the way you went until you reached this place.
Moses tried to rally the troops, but failed. In their panic, they had forgotten all God had done for them in redeeming them and leading them out of Egypt. Something Moses wants them to never, ever forget again.
Verse 32, in spite of this, you did not trust in the Lord your God, who went ahead of you on your journey in fire by night and in a cloud by day, to search out places for you to camp and to show you the way you should go. When the Lord heard what you said, he was angry and solemnly swore, no one from this evil generation shall see the good land I swore to give your ancestors, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh. He will see it, and I will give him and his descendants the land he set his feet on, because he followed the Lord wholeheartedly. Because of you, the Lord became angry with me, and also said, you shall not enter it either, but your assistant Joshua, son of Nun, will enter it. Encourage him, because he will lead Israel to inherit it. And the little ones that you said would be taken captive, your children who do not yet know good from bad, they will enter the land. I will give it to them, and they will take possession of it. But as for you, turn around and set out toward the desert along the route to the Red Sea.
God was justifiably angry because back then he had just done so many miracles. Like, think of with the Pharaoh. 9 of them, including turning rivers to red and killing the firstborn son. There's no way they should fail right now in their trust of him. The consequence for this rebellion was death in the desert for every single rebel. It took 38 years for that first generation to perish. The gift of the land was given to their children. Now, the next thing Moses wants them to remember is this: disobedience leads to defeat and destruction.
Verse 41, then you replied, we have sinned against the Lord. We will go up and fight as the Lord our God commanded us. So every one of you put on his weapons, thinking it is easy to go up the hill country. But the Lord said to me, tell them, do not go up and fight, because I will not be with you. You will be defeated by your enemies. So I told you, but you would not listen. You rebelled against the Lord's command, and in your arrogance you marched up into the hill country. The Amorites who lived in those hills came out against you. They chased you like a swarm of bees. They beat you down from Seir all the way to Hormah. You came back and wept before the Lord, but he paid no attention to your weeping, and he turned a deaf ear to you. And so you stayed in Kadesh many days, all the time you spent there.
When the first generation heard that God had decreed their death in the wilderness, they tried to backpedal. They said, okay, we will fight like you asked us to. But they went without the Lord. They attempted to take the land from the Amorites. They disobeyed again because God had already decreed, here's your consequence. And they tried to do it their way. But God said, nope, not without me, you won't, which is something for us to think about. The point God is making is that disobedience leads to defeat. Is there an area that you are being disobedient to what you know God wants you to do? How's it leading to defeat in your life? Perhaps defeat in your relationships, your testimony, your financial stability. What if you turned from disobedience? Because obedience leads to opportunity. What opportunities does God have for you if you would only obey? Restored relationships, financial stability, a testimony that leads others to Christ? Well, that is our beginning of Deuteronomy, and it only gets more interesting from here.
What's a club without friends? If you're enjoying the Bible Book Club, why don't you share it? And then you can say, Welcome to the club. New episodes drop every Monday, and get all episodes now on Amazon Music. As always, head over to susanme.com/Bible Book Club for show notes from today's episode. Bible Book Club is hosted by Susan Merrill and Heather Rubio, edited by Buck Buchanan, produced by Hayley Mawat.